Welcome to Totally Online Gaming Group. I'm your host for this particular session, Zachary, and we're going to bring you a new series called Dungeon Master's Craft, and it's structured like that because I wanted to be able to do hashtag run DMC. This is a new series where we're going to discuss the four Dungeon Masters here at Totally Online Gaming Group and our ideas, implementation of ideas, and just have a general conversation around what it means to be a Dungeon Master, share our tips and tricks, and maybe things we'd like to improve on or things that we have improved on and would like to share with you guys. But first, we're going to go ahead and shout out our sponsors. Firstly, Critical Hit Gaming Supplies. They curate a lot of the awesome gear that we use on session, such as the dice tray, dice bags. They really do make a lot of awesome product, and you could go ahead and visit them at criticalhitgamingsupplies.com. Enter code TOGG15 at checkout to receive 15% off your order. Once again, that is TOGG15. And then, secondly, our new sponsor. What is their name, Jason?
That is Metallic Dice Games. They have some different products, basically Critical Hit Gaming Supplies, and them kind of carry, some different things compared to each other, but they also have the same kinds of things, like dice and dice bags and dice trays. But they're a great sponsor. They offered us the opportunity to work with them as well. And so both these great companies we're working with. And you can use an affiliate link, which we will post in the comments for this recording. And with that affiliate link, you can get great deals over on Metallic Dice Games.
And lastly, our final new company that's joined the roster is going to be SideQuestCardsandGames.com. They are a local company owned by, me. We also offer various dice products, dice trays, no dice bags though, and a lot of other products, so board games, comic books, really just the whole nerd culture has been covered here, even though it is dead, according to my own podcast.
Yes, it is.
But that is once again SideQuestCardsandGames.com, where the main quest can wait. And without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into Dungeon Master's Craft. Our topic for this discussion is going to be world inspiration and implementation of those ideas. So, firstly, I'm going to go ahead and ask the group a general question here. We'll go around the table and just talk about what are some things that have inspired you to create the worlds you have, and how you've taken those ideas and taken them from concept to paper or Word document, whatever you use to craft your worlds, and then running it behind the DM screen. How do you implement those concepts to your players and make it meaningful in a 5th edition campaign? Andrew, I'll have you go first.
Oof, starting with a breath. All right. So, things that I find inspiring that can translate. So, when I'm working out how I'm going to run a game or what kind of idea I'm going to work with, things like that, I always have the fallback that I've probably read at this point close to 10,000 books in my life. It's an exhaustive amount. But music is really what kicks it off. It's always something musical. Maybe it's a specific kind of lyric that shows up in a song. Maybe it's a specific sound. Maybe it's a feeling or a mood that comes from it. And then I'm like, okay, so I have something there. And it might get stuck in my head for a little bit. And we always like to talk about like shower thoughts. The idea that something that hits you always at the most inappropriate time where you do not have pen and paper, or it's not going to work if you did. And that song will kind of kick in and be like, oh, this works. And then I'll theme something around it. And it's kind of like a spiral that goes out from there. The little pieces fall in as they go. That's kind of like how I'm putting stuff together, but once it translates to a table, it's a little bit different. I'm really big on being a writer first in a lot of ways. And because of that, I will build up concepts to wherever they go. Just kind of like the idea of like you journal and follow your thoughts to the end, wherever that might be. It's a common meditation technique, for instance. I do the same thing with how a character might feel, how they might think, what kind of world they think they exist in. And I'll just jot down notes. I'll do the same thing when I'm talking about looking at, say, a structure of the culture or the structure of, maybe a magic system, things like that. And I'll go back through and I'll do general revisions of, oh, well, this doesn't match up with this. These have conflicts. Sometimes it's okay, because if a character has a conflict with it, maybe it's just their interpretations and view in the world. But if it's a structural thing, well, okay, then we got to make some changes. But it all comes from a song at the end of the day. Really oddly enough, but that's just kind of how it works out.
I can totally see that, especially with the way you conceptualize and write lore into your campaigns. The way you conveyed that made a lot of sense for me, just seeing how you run games. Logan, how about you? What are some things that have inspired you, or you've managed to take a odd concept that, not typical high fantasy, and just make that a game?
So I can definitely say, for starters, I agree with Andrew that music is a very strong motivator and a source of inspiration when it comes to gaining ideas and creating content in D&D. For example, sometimes I'll put in my earbuds and walk down to like a gas station to get a snack, and on the way there I've got music playing and just have a bunch of ideas sprout up in my mind. And I just try to hold on to those because, it's just a walk down to the gas station. There's not really anything else to think about. So the mind kind of goes wild. You get to think of a bunch of ideas that you could make really good use of. But for me, especially, besides music, I actually take a lot of inspiration from games and like series and stuff. So think like Final Fantasy, for example. That's one. Even more, like out there games like Risk of Rain. And it really could be any kind of genre. It could be fantasy. It could be, sci-fi. It could be, I guess modern is another one, right? But, you just try to find something that sticks out to you and you hold on to it. And I think once you've done that, for me, implementing that, I always try to think of how I can put a twist on it. So any kind of traditional thing, right? To make it your own and to make it really work. For me, I feel like you try to change it slightly so it's not exactly traditional. I guess that's kind of the best way I could put it.
Yeah, gotta have your own spin, gotta have some originality to the concepts that you're bringing forward, because at the end of the day, there is no original idea. We're all inspired from something.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, how about you?
Well, I would say for me, music is good and all, but that's not my main source of inspiration. Mine is really more visual. Movies, shows, and books more than anything. I grew up reading all sorts of fantasy novels, sci-fi novels. Pretty much anything I could get my hands on. Heck, my dad threw the Lord of the Rings, into my hands when I was like 11 years old and said, "Read." I was like, okay. So I just went to town on books. I love books. I've been reading them forever, and it's the characters within there. The characters in the stories themselves, whether it's, fantasy, sci-fi, a comedy movie, hell, even like a romantic comedy or something like that, or a sitcom on TV. The characters, if they have real, true development, not something hokey, but real character development, that's what inspires me, because I like to see how the characters grow and change, and I like to kind of make my games around forcing all the player characters to start wherever they started, and for their characters to grow and change and have that real moment of, I started here, but now I'm so much more in the end. So by the end of the games, they really do feel like, wow, that character, started out as one thing, but now it's turned into something amazing. And the adventures they've had and all that. And that's where my concept starts with. And so then I take those ideas of great characters that I've read about and how they got from A to B and start, kind of writing that down and figuring out, okay, well, my players are the heroes of the story. So what about everybody else around them? And how are those characters built into the world? And that's where I get, out of that, usually, okay, a possible list of BBEGs and kind of create, okay, where could this story go, and start kind of writing down my notes on where a progression of the story could go. But then I like to stick with the lazy GM idea. Somewhat, anyway. I like to do a lot of things, on the fly. So I really try to build a loose framework, create the world, and then just, players, boom, here you go. You're in it. Do what you want. I'll throw you hooks. I'll do whatever. But you still go where you want, and the story will adjust as needed so that you can have a great adventure whatever direction you take.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea that you implement a sandbox, more or less.
Yep.
Especially that's readily seen in Adavar Ascension, where we have this whole world map. It's all laid out for us. It's if Gold wanted to go ahead and go to Overshore, you were prepared to do that.
Absolutely.
But we never did, so we ruined all of those things you wrote. The good old tangerine, if you call it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was Josh's moniker, and yeah. It's fine.
For me, though, Adam Sandler, like Jason was suggesting, is a huge inspiration for me. Rom-coms 100% are what inspire me. In all seriousness, no. I'm a very seasonal individual when it comes to my hobbies and interests, and that heavily plays into the way I build my worlds. And I think Jason saw that pretty heavily when we were building Monster Hunter, and I was running a Monster Hunter campaign where I was obsessed with it for months and months, and then all of a sudden I start thinking of world concepts and how to justify how human existence could even exist when there's giant fire-breathing Tyrannosaurus Rexes like fucking everywhere, and how those systems would even be put in place. But then beyond that, you have Magic the Gathering is a huge inspiration for me, where I don't like taking normal concepts of fantasy and making those the status quo. I like changing it up and implementing sources of mana for inspiration in worlds, stuff like that. Anime, another huge one, where Lana Kirkwall, my eventual new character, is entirely based on anime. And it changes monthly, sometimes even more frequently than that. So I would say, for me, anime, movies, books, like Gold is based off of Geralt of Rivia.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm pretty on the nose with my inspirations, and if you ask, you can very easily guess what I'm going to tell you with my inspirations. But the more interesting side of this conversation is, how do you take those concepts and inspirations and get them to an actual game plan for your game? So Monster Hunter was an easy one, because I managed to find a monster manual where some guy did all the hard work for me. He created all the stat blocks, the challenge ratings, all of the monsters from Monster Hunter World and its expansion Iceborne, and some classic Monster Hunter monsters, and made a monster manual for everyone to access. It was just a nice PDF. I can link it in the description if anyone's interested. But it was a fantastic module, and also gave some more rule sets for example, in Monster Hunter, one of the key mechanics is with any melee weapon, you have to sharpen it mid-fight. That way, it gives the monster some breathing room, and you're not just beating it to death. They implemented the whetstone mechanic, but I excluded that because I didn't want characters to take actions to run away from the monster and then sharpen their weapon, where the monster can just run up and multi-attack them when they're doing it. I didn't see any fun in that, but one of the things that I did implement that I enjoyed was the idea of surface conditions that are created by the monsters. Unfortunately, the party didn't get to run into one that had any major effect, but they had like slippery floor conditions. They did run into one where it was like an undead.
I was going to mention, you brought that like undead death fog crap. I was like, you son of a...
Yeah, somebody did the easy work for me there on that, but I had to go and take that concept of Monster Hunter, humanity basically is a fringe existence, and how does humanity have major cities where the players can get items, get healing potions, do any of the luxuries that adventurers are afforded, and I had to draw some really asinine excuses to make those exist, like floating cities or a dryad creating a magical barrier in the woods that would just strangle any monster that tried to come in, stuff like that. And so the world implementation was not exceedingly difficult, but I felt a little forced sometimes for the players. Just that way they could have the conveniences of being able to buy armor and not have to craft it themselves. Because I didn't see any resources for monster parts or anything, which is a huge part of Monster Hunter. What about you, Andrew? Implementing some of these concepts that you find through music and things that inspire you, but actually getting it to the players. How does that execution come to mind?
So, I don't know. I'm kind of like a half planner. And a lot of people, they have different DM styles, things like that, right?
Yeah.
And I think I've shown most of you guys how it's set up. Something I've learned over time, your players are going to never, ever follow a rail, no matter what it looks like. You can hide it, you can bury it in leaves, you can dig it and put it underground. I don't care what you do. They're going to know the rail's there, and they're going to jump the track. So, one of the things I've learned to implement pretty straightforward is I have plot objectives, and those objectives are intentionally hidden in a way that you can't meet them all. It's actually not possible. They're designed with a series of success, failure, ignored, or went against. And I have certain people that are tied to it based on those personas that I've generated, and they'll respond accordingly over time. A lot of other DMs will talk about something called a clock. The idea that the world still keeps moving and certain triggers may happen over time. And while I ascribe to a certain form of the clock, it's not rigid. The players are the clock. So I introduce a world with a concept, and that concept in itself is just, okay, so I'm going to have a small conversation with you all. What kind of story are you really looking for? Oh, I can do that here. And while Magnus Abum right now is slightly off of the original intent I'm sure you guys had in your minds, you can definitely say it's a fantasy game given how ridiculous magic is being applied right now. Right? So one of the things that I kind of talked about and was mentioned was the idea of a mystery, even though it was not fully agreed on. I went, but I can still use that as a thought, and then you guys can choose to buck it or not buck it. Mm-hmm. And because of that, the first game has 4 potential things that could happen. And one of them would have been bucking it completely. Mm-hmm. And there's been one in there all the way up through where there's a way to just go, I'm not going to go that route. That's kind of my clock, because what ends up happening is you start making decisions, you start making alliances, you start trusting or mistrusting people. Those people then develop feelings about you the same way you develop feelings about them based on their own personalities and how I present them. And then there's people that are on the outside that are just continuing down however they were built. You may run into them at different stages or not. You may never run into them. That's fine. That's what other games are for. And I'll just keep it in my head. And it creates a timeline of events. I guess they won't stay in my head. They'll end up on paper later the next day. But taking the original concept and applying it, it's usually about describing a world and then letting somebody manipulate the world, which I guess we could talk about session 0 as kind of the exact example of that. Mm-hmm. I gave you guys a rough concept of the world, and then I kind of put it in your hands to literally mold it how you wanted to, and then you had to deal with the consequences of whatever you did. Yeah. Right? So in a lot of ways, you're making your own decisions of what you're going to deal with and not deal with, and then I put you in the world a couple X amount of time later with the consequences of all the things you guys have made decisions. And in my mind, consequences are not negative specifically. They're just results. Mm-hmm. Right? So every decision somebody makes has a positive, negative, or neutral consequence. People always are trained these days, consequences are a problem. Consequences are negative. Not always. They're just outcomes. So I guess I can use the word outcome, right? Yeah. And I've ran games like that for a while. I went one that was intentionally inspired actually by a book. It was a little bit closer to that book in concept when it started. And I let the players destroy the concept. Of course, one of my players kind of didn't know the book, didn't know what the book was at all, or the concept it creates, and yet somehow fell right into how it plays out, which forced all the other players partially into the story. And it's kind of funny because if you look at it as watching something, first, if you break it up into 4 sections in the game, First section kind of follows the book loosely because they're already put in the concept. Sections 2 and 3 look nothing like the book, but because of the one player that we had everybody draw straws and whoever got the short straw, and nobody knew who got the short straw, they were a traitor to the whole game's concepts. And because they managed to keep it quiet for so long, they kept pulling strings and pulling things in a certain way, and it ended up by section 4 of the story where it's coming into the climax and full resolution, resolves almost exactly like the book. And I'm like going, well, that wasn't the plan, but that's the player's plan.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yep.
Well, I think that's a really interesting way to set things up, Andrew, and I'm certainly going to take some notes later on by listening to this. But
Yep, me too.
for me, taking those inspirations, all those concepts, and making them into a campaign, I view it like a line, right? You've got this line of rope, starting point and end point. And now there's a bunch of lines with each arc of the campaign being one line itself. At the starting point, it's where the players are at the start of that arc, and end of the line is the resolution of that arc, however that might happen. So starting point, adventurers learn about some kind of threat. End point, they fight big evil dude who has sorcerer powers. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Now, on this line, I think of a bunch of spots that need to be filled, and I need to think of how to fill them. And so that's what I do with those concepts, those inspirations and stuff. Going back to how I got them, I think of the games, the music, the shows I watch, all that kind of stuff. Grab those things that really stand out to me, put my twist on them, and then I think, how can I insert them on that line to make things interesting? So let's say there's a bit of information the players need to get at some point along this line. I could perhaps give it to them with insert this character concept that I had inspiration for. And I'm like, hey, that's a perfect spot to fit in this one character that I created based off that inspiration that I got, that I put a twist on. So I put it there. The players start talking to that character. They get their they get their information from them. And they move along and they go to the next spot that needs to be filled. So I might fill it with some kind of location, so on and so forth. But I basically just grab a whole mismatch of these concepts with my own twist on them, throw them on that line where I think they would fit, so long as they're as a spot that needs filling. And then by the end of it all, they've had all of their fun with these each unique concepts, and they're at the end and they reach that satisfying conclusion. And either that's the end of the campaign or that's the start of the next arc, and rinse and repeat. That's kind of how I treat it.
I like the idea where you function it more or less as a line. You gotta fill the paces on the line, kind of like a number graph.
Yep.
I've always had trouble myself with actually implementing things to keep the arc consistent.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you could structure it like that, that'd be a good way for anybody to just storyboard out an arc for a campaign.
I mean, yeah, that's essentially how I do it, is I get the basics down, and then in my spare time, I build a little bit on it more and more, because I'm always getting more ideas. I think we all are. Mm-hmm. But the players usually end up feeling fairly satisfied by the end of it, because there's enough content built into each of those major spots on that line that they feel like this isn't a nothing burger, this is a proper, run-through of a story, I guess.
Yeah, well, you can definitely tell you're my son, because we have a lot of similar ideas. You've altered yours to be unique to you, but I kind of already mentioned in the first part a little bit of how I implement my world. Is I look at all these characters that I've over the years, through books, movies, and all that just kind of inspire me in one way or another about how this character developed, whether it was a good guy or a bad guy, or whether the character itself was an event, that happened. Like the movie Dante's Peak, the volcano is a character, okay, and what it does. So, and it's a, cataclysmic event for this small town. All these things, I just kind of think of, okay, well, what do I want to do? What basically kind of create what is the bad situation that is currently happening in the world before the world is even written down. And then whether that is a person doing something, some kind of natural event, maybe it's a supernatural event. Maybe that supernatural event is caused by a person, or a BBEG. Maybe it's a political thing that's happening. What is happening in the world that is bad? That, by the end of the thing, if this thing, goes to its completion, it will be bad for everybody. Maybe not world ending, but just really, really bad. But it could also be something world ending. I come up with that. And that is my character. Whether that is caused by an actual character or the event itself is the character. And then, throughout the world, to actually make the world, I think of all these great stories that I've read and basically go, okay, well, what kinds of characters have dealt with different things within their own stories that, to me, in my mind, fit the theme of what I'm feeling, what I'm going for. Okay, well, Brunner Battlehammer, he went through a hell of a lot. Okay, he made some great friends, became a hero and all that, eventually became king. But he went through a lot of stuff. And he kind of has his own way of doing things. He's a very dwarf-like dwarf, but he's got his own thoughts and his ways of doing things. Well, you know what? I want to have dwarves like that. So, I gotta have an area like that in my world. Okay, who else do you want? Well, Legolas, a bit of a snob, but also a hell of a great shot, and kind of the atypical elf that everyone thinks of. Maybe I want one like him in there. Maybe I want that to be how my elves are. Okay? So I gotta have an area somewhere in the world where a lot of elves like that maybe hang around. Or at least an area that they would like to call home. Okay? And I kind of think of those areas. And then, honestly, I use the method where I take a whole bunch of dice, I drop them on a sheet of paper, and based on the shape of the dice and where it is, and I just start drawing shapes around it and get myself an idea of the topography of the area, and then I go, that looks like where I want my dwarves to live. Okay? That looks like where I want my elves to live. Or, this came out really funky. Maybe my dwarves and elves, if I'm using dwarves and elves, maybe they don't have a home. Maybe, however many of our left, are just spread out. And I kind of use what is being created to come up with how I want to do things. And then from there, like Logan was saying, I've got, okay, here's my world, here's my start point. Okay, this is where things are. Here's my character, my end-all, be-all of evil. I gotta have story beats in there of things that are happening in the world as the players go through the world. And depending on which direction those players take, the story beat's going to affect them in some way, shape, or form. Okay? And they can have an effect on it, which in turn gets a response from, everything, action, reaction, and outcome. So eventually, though, it's these things I can shift around and move so that you get these story beats along the way until eventually you get to the end. And then when you get to the end, well, see if you win or fail.
Well, I think I already know the answer for just about everybody here. But generally, when you're creating a world based off of something you're inspired from, you're the one who either knows the source material best for that particular field, or you're the one who crafted the world, right? You have an ideal image of how you want the campaign to go. But player agency is the ultimate deciding factor in how your stories happen, so I know heavily from the Monster Hunter campaign to embrace the chaos in this aspect, and generally I think you all are going to agree with me on this, is that, for example, when the first basically tutorial of the Monster Hunter campaign was done, y'all had done 3 or 4 quests, and it was typical Monster Hunter fashion. You go up to the board, pull something off the board, you see a monster, you go hunt the monster, you come back and you're done, right? And that can be good for a few sessions of just you go out, you talk to a few NPCs, you find the problem, you solve the problem with your sword, and you're done.
Yep.
But eventually, the narrative needed to happen. And so the party set out on the road towards the blue mana-aligned city from the white mana-aligned city. I can't remember the name of it. I remember Remwell.
Yeah, Remwell I remember.
I don't remember the blue one. Doesn't matter, it falls from the sky anyway.
Yeah.
Flugel-Stugel.
Flugel-Stugel, sure.
There you go.
Sounds good.
But I ran into the problem where, through the chaos, managing the party was fine, but my own inspirations ended up getting my own priorities mixed up. And so I ended up running into a sort of debacle where I'm running a monster hunting campaign. Right. The party was just chased by a Rathalos, and they decided to veer off into the woods. And I had just seen the movie The Ritual. And so what does DM Zach do? He decides, fuck Monster Hunter. They're gonna get chased by a Norse god in the woods and almost get crucified in a tree.
Screw you, crazy hand antler deer thing.
But ultimately, they ended up being an exciting and memorable fight for the party of, oh shit, we can't beat this thing. We need to let it take the fucking NPC and run. But then the alignments came into play, and they're like, no, I can't just leave this NPC here. Fuck, we gotta figure out a creative solution to pull this NPC out of a tree and fucking book it. They eventually do. But then that kind of derailed the whole Monster Hunter concept, and then the Demi-Lich arc afterwards ended up really solidifying the end of it being a Monster Hunter exclusive campaign and turned more into a D&D campaign. But through the chaos, the theme was lost, and it ended up being a good campaign for it, though. So, I already typically know your answers, but I want to hear you all say, yes, I agree, embrace the chaos. So, Andrew, how do you try to balance staying thematic to the campaign setting and world that you originally created, while also dealing with player agency, and maybe your own inspirations along the way?
So I'm actually going to say I don't embrace the chaos necessarily. In fact, there is no chaos nor order. Mm-hmm. I don't apply order, so there cannot be chaos.
Ding, 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 right there.
And if you guys have already experienced it, the listeners probably, if they want to see how this works out over time, but just watch some of the streams as we go. But a very good example of why I say this is I build a world as essentially to exist. Its people are going to do what its people do. The story's not about them. The story is about what players do. And because of that, I don't have to worry about necessarily embracing one order or another. First off, I toss alignment right out the window.
Yeah.
So that's something I guess I leave to players if they want to enforce it on themselves. I've had really bad experiences in the past with the alignment system. Anyone that's been around D&D for any amount of time is more than aware of the problems with paladins and the old ideas behind alignment.
Lawful stupid.
Yeah. That's one way of looking at it. Or holier than thou ass.
Yeah.
Either one still applies.
Yep, absolutely.
But I can give you a great example, actually. This is a character I played. It was in a Mage of the Ascension game, so it's not D&D related. It's White Wolf games, but that's okay. And this character was a Knights Templar per how Mage of the Ascension deems them. All the Knights Templar swore an oath that essentially guaranteed they would be at the final battle of things. They are strictly, actually Christian characters. But each one has an individualized viewpoint of what that oath means, and their faith means to them. And because of this, they get something that's called true faith. It's a physical mechanic in the World of Darkness system that has a lot of power behind it when it's used. And the Knights Templars, faith points can go from 1 to 10, which is a really high scale because normally it's just a very expensive merit. It's like, oh, that person's got faith. And they can maybe repel vampires with crosses per old mythology. In the Templars' case, their faith is based on their arete score, which is basically how well they understand magic within the world and their conceptualization of things. Therefore, their true faith keeps going higher and higher and higher the stronger they actually get, which reinforces their faith. In a strange way, it becomes a cascade, because at a certain point, you're going to have that pendulum swing, where they start getting reinforced so much and start yearning to learn. They're either going to hit a brick road and never grow again, or they're going to be the snowball that rolls downhill, and they're just going to scream up to the highest things you can, and it'll cease to exist because they get their final battle, whatever that means. This character was designed and built to operate on the alignment system from D&D intentionally. He was 1,000% lawful good, but he was lawful good from 1095.
Oh, jeez.
And he was lawful good based on scripture concepts, which drove everybody there out of their minds, because I would do things that would exist in the way scripture would have been before interpretations. It's like read as written. But he also had a very old mentality. So when we got stuck with a computer problem, right? Somebody gets stuck in a computer. I'm just looking at a keyboard. I'm like, they just keep saying they want out, and I don't understand a keyboard. But the escape key sounds about a reasonable answer. So if I press the escape key and I believe enough,
it happens.
It happens.
Yep.
And why does it happen? Because I have the right magic skills that I don't know I'm using magic. That's their whole point. It's my faith that does it, and I get yanked out of the computer. Right? So I've subscribed to the alignment system and more on that kind of concept. If somebody wants to have a code or an ethics system, regardless of where that falls, they're going to get tested somewhere. And because of this, my players have this own way they make characters. And they have their own objectives, their own things. They may not be codes in the sense of oathing and designs or swearing by revenge or whatever. But it still has the same principle to it. You're going to behave in a certain way that fulfills the needs and desires of your character, which in and of itself will build a story. And I don't need to worry about the chaos and order behind things. And because of that, I also don't need to worry about an alignment system, nor do I have to worry about if a character is good, bad, or otherwise. To that point, I also don't build BBEGs. Ever. I used to, and I did it as a point for games when I would tell people, hey, this is who you're going to deal with, what's going to happen. And I still like the idea of the huge cinematic thing that might happen. Video games are pretty notorious for this. Movies will do it too, where something really big happens. You usually go and talk to a player and be like, hey, this is going to happen. This guy's going to show up, or this lady's going to show up. She's going to have an issue with somebody, or this being's going to show up. Doesn't matter. And it might, I don't know, throw a character through St. Peter's Basilica's stained glass window in the main chapel. And make a point in doing it.
Yeah.
But that's after the players have already engaged enough in a story to have created a thing like that. So I tend not to make BBEGs anymore. I haven't in a long time. The trader game. That's the closest to making one, and that person didn't have to do that. They just chose to.
Yep, strictly player agency.
Yes.
Well, this originally was about
embrace the chaos or no?
and how you handle. No, you don't have to apologize.
Basically, world tenacity.
Yeah.
And then how you handle staying on theme. You said, right? Well, essentially, for me, I think it's really simple. This is going to be a pretty quick, short answer. And it's something I've actually recently started doing, and also inspired by a very good friend of mine who's also a DM. Basically, I look at the theme of the world, so to speak, right? And how I handle chaos and all that, and I say, anytime I get the thought in my head, this doesn't fit with the aesthetic, I go, there is no aesthetic. This is the world that I have, and it's my world. So it doesn't have to be knights in shining plate armor. If all of a sudden a dude with a gun shows up, so be it. So that's the new aesthetic. Deal with it. And that's just how I do it.
Chaos.
Chaos. I'm going to have to say, yes, go with the flow, go with chaos. Because, while different from Andrew, I do make a BBEG, but I don't make a singular BBEG. I have, like I said, I have my end. This is the end thing that happens. And I don't, say, this one guy is it. Or this event, the event is still the bad thing. And again, it's still a character. But wherever the players go, they can choose to avoid that event or ignore that event. Any little information that I throw out there, I'll have, several different things that I throw out there just to give them things to do. Pathways that they could potentially take. They can also just thrust out on their own and do whatever they want. But I'll throw things out to kind of help with, hey, you know what, if they go this way, well, that works out because I kind of had a story beat in this area that if they want to go that way, perfect, awesome, less work for me because I've already thought up that area. Okay? But if they say, I'm going this other direction, there's really no skin off my back because a lot of the things is those story beats that I put in there and clues or things like that or things that I work on, most of the time, like if I put together an encounter that, hey, this is an encounter that I think would be fun and that the players would enjoy, they don't go over that direction. No problem. It just sits there. It waits for them. Okay? And eventually, if it gets to a point where, I really, really want to use this encounter because I think this will be a fun challenge for them, the location and things like that, they're not fixed. I can move that to another location. Okay? Hey, they went that direction, they're heading that direction, no problem. That little cave that they were looking for, that has this encounter, well, now it's over there.
Yeah, it grew legs and it walked over there.
The fuck over
Just
there.
like that house Baba Yaga has.
Exactly.
It walked away.
It's over there now.
It's chickens.
It's available for them now in this new area. Okay? If they go and check it out, awesome. Now it exists there. They know that cave's there.
I definitely agree with that. I think repurposing content is one of the smartest things you can do because it does suck to work really hard on something, look forward to something, and then it just doesn't happen and you can't make it happen. But then you can make it happen because you can just, like you said, you throw it somewhere else.
Yeah, and primarily it's, when it comes to the chaos, is there a path that the players are taking? Like, they are tracing down some lead that they, it's clear they want this storyline that they're kind of creating as they follow it down. They want this pathway. Okay, well, I'll adjust my story beats to meet up with that, to help. Okay, because that's what they're interested in. And one of the ways that'll happen, hey, you know what? This would be some good information for them to have. Well, that information is located in this person's house way the hell over here. No, it's not. It's not. It's also over here. Somehow it made its way over there. It's got legs. It goes. You put it wherever you want it to be, and you can move it anytime you want because the ultimate thing is the players will go wherever direction they want. And if they're following something that's fun for them, and you adjust your path towards kind of your end goal of, hey, some ultimate climax that they will eventually deal with. Well, you adjust things so that they eventually get there, whatever pathway they take. Mm-hmm. As long as they're having fun, awesome. And if they need some additional information here and there to help them in their goal of which way they want to take their own adventure, awesome. I'll just move this over here for you. Now you got that information available in your grasp, just whether or not you choose to grab onto it.
Yep. Ultimately up to player agency and how we build our encounters because they are not static by any means.
Oh, hell no.
Story beats can go wherever the hell you need them to.
Yep. You could have gone either direction last week. You chose the path with the 2 ogres as opposed to the path with the 3 wyverns.
I feel like at this point I would have preferred the 3 wyverns.
Yeah.
At least I could have gotten giddy up, motherfucker.
I'm looking at you. That was really hectic.
I'm looking at Tomer specifically.
Yeah, well, so, quick digression.
Sure, we'll do a side tangent here.
Oscar, you were wearing disadvantaged stealth armor. What were you thinking?
My man was wearing half plate trying to stealth up on 2 hill giants.
Yeah. Actually, no, those were hill giants. I did use hill giant stats.
Yeah.
So technically,
eat my dick, Jason.
Same thing.
Basically. But okay. We're getting to around a time where I think it is appropriate for us to go ahead and give closing thoughts and closing advice. Ultimately, Dungeon Master's Craft should be an educational concept here. So I want to go around the table and let's all just give a general tip. when we're creating worlds and we're working off of content that, we're not building a Lord of the Rings world. It's something that it's a semi-original design. Like, for my advice when I was building the Monster Hunter campaign, feel free to always rip off other people.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the sense of plagiarism here, but if you're creating a concept or wanting to do a world that, quite frankly, somebody's already put all of the time in, they made a PDF or stat blocks for monsters you wanted to use anyway, please. Like, this is the internet. We're all about sharing. This is a creative pool of imagination here. Let's use the ideas that we have come up with and put our own spin on it. Take interesting content, make it your own, but, you can cheat a little bit. What about you, Andrew?
I would probably recommend to anyone trying to get into world crafting, because it is definitely a daunting experience.
Mm-hmm.
And to a lot of people, it can get very intimidating, things like that. I'm going to tell you 3 things I learned very early on that solve most of this. 1, look into... fiction writers do this the most, but all writers do it. Look into the idea of a progress outline. What you can do very quickly, simple sentence, nothing more, a single sentence. You write essentially a purpose for whatever your entire concept is. Then turn around and go ahead and write maybe 3 things you want to see. Leave everything else kind of how it is. And then, like, you would break down chapters. Just write a single sentence and have it constantly be progressing. Be like, okay, so I have a concept. My concept is I'm stuck in a world where light is very low and death is in every corner. 3 things that should feel about this world, or maybe something that should be in the world. Foreboding, off balance, hunger. All right. Why would I choose these things? Well, humans, if we're going to use humans, I haven't even gone that far, but let's just think of creatures in general, wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of predators hunt at night, and a lot of prey animals don't do well at night outside of getting away from predators.
Mm-hmm.
Our concepts of plants and bacteria, things like that, they don't do well in low light to no light. So food's going to be more scarce. So people are going to be more hungry. And predators are probably going to be larger, so they're going to have this sense that something's always on you. Something's always around you.
So the foreboding part.
Before the foreboding gets fulfilled. Right? So you start running into these issues. Chapter 1, the firelight. Just getting told something by a grandmother around a campfire. Or maybe it's you were supposed to be sent out on a test with a couple other people, and you don't know where anybody went, and all you got is your bone knife. Chapter 2, my only friend. Maybe somewhere along the lines, somebody was really important to you. And that person is the only one you can count on to tell them something that you learned in the first chapter. You're taking a risk, and so on. You just can't take this idea.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't building a world like you would think in a sense of gaming world. This is building a concept.
Mm-hmm.
Then you just have to populate some people. Well, I'm already starting to populate people because now there's potential of grandma.
Mm-hmm.
There's potential of whoever this person that we're referencing as I is, because the players aren't going to be I.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That might be their guide. That might be their mentor. If you want to take Jason's route, that might be a BBEG waiting to happen.
Yep.
It could be anything. The friend might be somebody on the same lines. Maybe it's a rival system. Maybe that turns into a rival later that someone's going to deal with. Already got 3 characters. You're only 3 sentences in and 3 descriptors.
Yep.
And you just do this for a little bit. You start coming up with ideas that will fill your world. The transition part's the only other part that matters. So at this point, you're going to worry about locations. In theory, while you've been writing your sentences, you've been thinking of where these people live and what they interact with. That'll give you a small scope. So my next piece of advice, beyond a writer's outline, improv. Concepts of improv, just watch anything on YouTube or listen to a podcast.
Whose line is it anyway?
Whose line is it anyway? Watch a TV show that's about it. Take a class. Doesn't matter. The idea for improv really isn't so much around anything other than I was handed a concept and I came up with a concept, which you just did in front of you as an example. Right? So that's really one of the 2. And the third one, this is going to sound a little off for most of you at the table, right? Sometimes it's worth finding either an image or a sound that grounds the concept for yourself.
That's not off at all.
Okay. Sometimes it is for people. None of these sound like a traditional way of making a game. Don't worry about encounters. That comes after you have a world that you can work with and play it. Dungeon Masters have a hard time sitting down at a table and improvising the whole game. Some try. It works for about 3 games. You might get 5 if you're lucky. Anything past that, your players have long since railroaded any concept you got. Continuity is shot, and quite frankly, you're not getting it back. So those are the 3 pieces of advice. Outline, improv, something to ground you.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty solid.
As always, Andrew is profound in his remarks.
See, he's the wizard here. We're all...
I'm
just
the barbarian.
No, I was going to say just lowly scholars.
No, barbarian.
No.
Me like campaign.
Sorry, I'm definitely the bard. I got some knowledge that I learned in school, but most of the time I was just drinking, doing drugs, and hanging out with chicks. So, you know.
I have to take offense to being a wizard.
Yeah, I feel like the wizard could still get chicks. Maybe not do drugs, but
Ooh,
they know better.
Alright, so for my piece of advice, I'm pretty much reiterating something I said earlier, but with more detail. And I'm going to do it with emphasis, because I feel like emphasis will get the point across. Inspiration. Look everywhere. I sat down at a coffee shop. I saw a frog. Boom, NPC. That's all you gotta do. You just look at anything and everything, and you see how beautiful our world is.
Frog coffee shop.
Coffee shop. But you just look at how beautiful our world is, and literally anything. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. Try to think of how you could use that, and how you could tell an amazing, entertaining story, and have a great time with your friends by using that. I'm gonna look at something in the room. Improv off of it. So let's see.
Here's one. The smell of the brownies.
All right, smell the brownies. So recently, a gourmet baker has come into town who is known continent round as this just absolutely amazing baker. Like, no one has met anyone as good as them. Lower, okay. So basically, there's this baker. Continent round. No one bakes as well as they do, and they came to your town, right? They have amazing brownies. So what do we do with them to make this interesting, to actually have some content in our game? They get kidnapped. And the players start to find out about that. They look around and find details relating to it, and so on and so forth. So we got all that just from a brownie.
Nice. Very nice.
Sorry about being loud.
That's okay. You were excited. That's good. Mine is actually very, very simple. I'm going to go more so with when you're creating your world, how do you populate it? This tip, history. Okay? There have been so many amazing societies before. You know, the Greeks, the Romans, you know, the Persians. I mean, so many different societies. Different cultures, different things like that. Okay? Best example, I will say, is Zach and I, when we were up at New York Comic Con, we went to, it was like
the Museum of
Natural History, you know, right outside of, you know, near Central Park. We went there, walked through. I took more pictures of the cultural stuff in the African area, the Asian area, all the cultural stuff than I did of the dinosaur bones, which are badass. It
was the only funded part of that goddamn museum.
Yeah, but I took pictures of all this stuff because of DM inspiration and potentially using that in the campaigns. Because now I can populate my world. Hey, you know, in my world, I've got this society of gnolls. Well, how does their society structured? You know what? I'm going to structure them like the Celtic warriors. Okay, from back when the Romans were up fighting against Celts and Norsemen and all up there. I'm going to go off of that society. So the structure of their society, things like that. Okay, speaking of the Romans, hey, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make my dwarves have a Roman society. You know, the military structure. You know, they've got, praetorians, legatuses, all this kind of stuff. And then they speak, like if you've ever watched the Spartacus series on like Netflix or, wherever it's showing up, okay, they speak like that. Okay? Use those things in your game. Say, I'm not going to build this society from scratch. There's so many interesting things in history. I'll grab a society there and plop it in. And then, all you got to do, tweak it a little bit here and there to make it unique.
All right, guys. So, here is the twist that I did not tell any of you.
Oh, crap.
It's a lemon.
No. It's a tangerine.
Lime?
Oh, it's always a tangerine.
Tangerine.
So, what we're going to do is we discussed world concepts today.
Mm-hmm.
What all four of us are going to do is for the next episode, we're going to come up with a original, I say with air quotes, world concept. And then next episode, the first chapter of the conversation will be us agreeing on the world concept, and we're going to move forward with that and create a world to this series. And so, next conversation topic, we're going to zoom out, and we're going to start with topography and the actual creation of the world itself. What does it look like?
So, quick question. Do we each come up with an individual, or is this a collaborative effort to start with?
It's a collaborative effort. However, all four of us are going to come up with a world concept and then agree on it next episode.
Okay.
So basically, we're going to pick one of the four.
Exactly. We're going to roll with that series
So
from there where we all collaborate and create.
See, that's what I was going to say. We each come up with our own kind of world concept, and then we present those and then pick which we like best.
Exactly.
All right.
And since we're going to be on camera, we can actually show the process by which we're going to do this, starting whenever we do the next episode of this.
All right.
I like it.
I would like to ask something odd.
Okay, go ahead. Ask something odd.
Sure, because
3?
we're talking about D&D a lot. Should it be a D&D-like world, or can it be any kind of world?
Any kind of world. And this is just a Dungeon Master specific. This doesn't... You can use a system outside of 5th edition. If you want to make an Exalted world, make something an Exalted. But right now, it's just world concept. We'll figure out the system we're going to use to best use that world once we get to the actual creation through encounters, the way the world has to be balanced with the mechanics of the game.
What's balanced?
Whatever the fuck
We'll
you want.
figure it out.
We'll figure balance.
Yeah.
Don't ask me about challenge ratings,
We'll
man.
figure it out.
Exactly.
Don't use challenge ratings.
Exactly.
I use numbers, guys.
Rule number 45 of DM Craft. What is a challenge rating? Don't use that. It's an arbitrary number assignment that you should basically keep in mind as an arbitrary concept. Yeah, they're level 5. It says their challenge rating 8.
Whatever.
Just keep in mind what's fun, and then walk away from there.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Alright, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening to Dungeon Masters Craft's first episode. Real quick, let's go ahead and talk about our sponsors one last time. Critical Hit Gaming Supplies, Metallic Dice Games, and my awesome company, Side Quest Cards and Games. All really, really good content and products. Please check them out. Check out Nerd Culture's Dead Podcast, where you will likely be able to hear this as well as many other conversations relating around the nerd society that we all live in. Anything else while we're closing out, gentlemen?
No. Keep gaming.
Yep. Keep gaming, says Jason. Y'all have a good night.